Evening, everyone. Chairman for Mr. Twist stands for like Reverend Reese. Everyone, I've read about this before, I want to see for the longest time. Even everyone is good to be here. So this is very important part of what ETOP will do in terms of consultation and for like these to hear the feedback. It is something that we all can agree on, and I think one of the clear themes coming out of today's session is that one, the report isn't a perfect report, but there are some good recommendations. Another theme is broader consultation is needed with all the key stakeholders, including the church, the trust schools. Right? That is very, very clear from what we are hearing from the stakeholders today. Excuse me. That is something that we said it in the press conference, that we are committed to reaching out, having town halls, taking invitations like these to hear the very, very good recommendations so that we can augment, we can include these ideas into ultimately what will be implemented. And that's very, very important. What I will also say is, and I've been in many implementation projects, and we have to be very careful about implementation. The truth is, anyone who has been in business school or any kind of academic training or research, that implementation is very, very difficult. It's very, very hard. In fact, most implementation projects will eventually fail. And the reason why the prognosis isn't good for many of these projects is because, one, we are in search of perfection. We usually tend to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so we look at something, okay, it's going to be better, let's move here, let's spend some more time, and eventually time passes by. When you look at what you have implemented, it's not really much. Now, see, it's not just in government, it's notorious in the private sector. Notorious. So, a word of caution. Let's all accept, and I think we have accepted, that the outcome from what we have today should be better. And we need to do some work to fix it. So let's start. This is going to be tantamount to this analogy. Pretty much what we're going to be doing is laying the trap, driving the train at the same time. So some of the ideas may not be the best ideas. But let's not quarrel and fight and say we have which agenda and so on and so forth. Right? Because that's in nobody's interest. Certainly not the kids' interest. I believe if we implement 20% of the recommendations in the Patterson report, we will be doing much better implementation. I think, let us agree on that. We are going to aim higher, but I'm making a point that even if we implement 20% of the recommendations, if some of the things that are recommended in early childhood research, for example, we begin to take those things on and move them and have real implementation, then you will actually see transformation in that area. So let's agree on that and let's begin to move that process along. And then let's have 4 IDs. We'll be all over the place, all over the country. Mrs. Bastian, I was moved by your statement. You definitely need to be talking to persons like yourself. Getting the feedback. Very, very good and very insightful feedback. And then let's amend what we have. Right? We're all Jamaican. We are in search of a better education system. Right? We're on the same team. And that's what I think we need to look at. That we are all on the same team. Let's not separate ourselves into silos and different factions. Because then if we do that, we're going to fail. Then we're going to go back here, in 4 years' time with XYZ report. Might have been Patterson, could be someone else. We're going to have probably a different set of people, and we're going to have the same, believe it or not, we can't make this up, we'll have the same set of discussions and so on. So we're not mad people, right? We can't do the same things for so many years and expect a different outcome. We had, what was it? The Davis report from 2004, you had a report before that. Let's make this time different. That is my ask of you. Let's make this time different. And the way to do so is for us to be, at least, behave as if we're on the same team. I have no agenda. I'm not a politician. I'm not being paid to do this. In fact, I have my own business. My shareholders are asking me, so you find time to do all of this instead of working on our business and so on. I mean it because I'm a Jamaican and I actually want to see a Jamaica that we can all be proud of. That's why we're here today, this evening. That's why you're all sitting here. And so I'm saying, let us actually behave as if we're on the same team. So in public forum, when we speak, the vitriol, the disagreements and so on, we can do so because it's a democracy. And that is welcome. But let's not communicate in a way where we create barriers that make it difficult to reach across and have genuine collaboration. Because that is what it's going to take to move this thing forward. Collaboration. And so I absolutely believe we can do this. I think so. Right? We hear, Mrs. Boston here first at meeting, but very, very moved by your comments. We hear my good brethren here in terms of the parents, and they have a view as well, which we want to hear, right? And we will absolutely hear it. And, I'm absolutely certain that if we act as if we are Jamaicans, we're on the same team, then we will get it. So, that's one thing. So please, we are working on a communication plan, transformation, oversight committee. We're going to be reaching out. We are going to be creating avenues to receive feedback. Please provide the feedback. When we reach out and ask for a meeting for you to share, for us to actually understand some of what you are saying, right? So that we can say, okay, how do we implement this? You make yourself available so that we can do real work. Because this is important, but it's more important when we actually get it in terms of a policy, a change in the law, when it actually feeds into an outcome where we have more kids achieving higher educational standards.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stokes. And I'm not preempting anybody else or if you would say. First of all, I presume to speak on behalf of this group. You can be assured of maximum cooperation, not obstruction. But Dr. Stokes, could I understand, your commission, is it a consultative commission or is it an implementation commission? I thought we had the consultation with Patterson. We've been waiting years.
Right. So, implementation, to do it properly, you have to consult. So, there is no or shouldn't be a distinction between implementation and consultation. Or else you end up with a problem that Mrs. Pastor so eloquently described just now. You implement things in a vacuum. You can't do that. That doesn't make any sense. So my answer to your question is that to implement properly, we have to consult to find out how, for example, right, in terms of funding of schools, right, and how that's going to be done. There are good ideas being generated here today that we have to get back to the minister. Is there a policy position? So consultation will be a key part of the conversation, absolutely.
We have 3 persons in Europe. The first one here, the second here, and the third. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, George. I comment this from the point of view of a businessman who happens to have done education, economics, and so on very early in life. So, and I've been looking at the education system for a very long time. And I don't want to saddle you with something which is not yours. You are responsible for execution. What has happened is that the education system was owned by the churches. The state system came in the 20s, and since then the state has sort of taken the dominant role in what is happening. Fast forward to today, the system now has a track record which says faith schools and trust schools are the best performers, turn out the best habilitated students, and produce the best results. May I ask you to consider Dr. Stokes in implementation? Because usually in business, you start where you have some winners. You don't ignore the winners. Usually say, we look at the situation and say, what in the system is working properly? Or working better than anything else? And you start with that. And I'm going to ask you if you can consider in your implementation, just to see that that principle in business is applied. Look at what is working and build on it.
Yeah.
I see where it's within your spirit.
No, I mean, it's an interesting thought. The answer to your question is yes, we will consider, absolutely. Early childhood is something that keeps coming up as a major area of focus that we should place a lot of resources in terms of getting the recommendations specific to that sector moving, right? Something that we have started discussion on in terms of the implementation plan and how to strategically time the various initiatives, right? So we are looking at it, and it's not easy, I must tell you, right?
I don't want to be misunderstood.
Yes.
I'm saying the church and trust sectors have worked and performed better than everything else.
Yes.
So I'm just saying, can you free them up to do what all the evidence points to, that they have been doing extraordinarily well?
I understand what you're saying.
Okay, could you get the next?
Hi, in primary school.
Amen. The blue book.
How many of us are civic school?
Amen.
How many of us are Bible?
Amen.
How many of us are dictionary?
Amen. A history of Jamaica.
3 R's. Reading, writing, arithmetic. It goes back. We have to start with the young ones. We can talk to the cows from home. We're not going to deliver until we do that. Deacon, please remember, 2014, I was on the board of JFL. We did a report and we gave it to them at the Ministry of Education. That report said there are 250,000, remember, at-risk kids between the ages of 14 and 23. And that report said if we don't fix that, in 18 months to 10 years, the crime rate in this country will go through the roof. Remember, Deacon?
I do. The response to that to close down the program.
Thank you. So change the government and it died. So forgive me. I don't like politicians. Love the country. Only politicians have a problem because you never know when they're going to tell you the truth or what is politically correct for them. Okay? When the removal of auxiliary fees came up in 2016, I'm on the PTA at Denominational. I'm the PTA president on the board. I objected to it. I said to Minister Reid at the time, Minister Reid, you're going to give $11,000 extra. Remember? And I said to him, we were charging $35,000 at the time. So I said to him, just increase the money to $22,000 and let us charge the difference at the market. 80%, believe it or not, 80% of the schools, out of 180 schools that they funded, they were covered by that extra money. 80%. So only 20% that were there, which was primarily the trust and church schools, that had a slight difference. And the minister said no. Why? It was not politically correct. So why are we going to waste our time and go back over this thing again? It's about the funding. You mentioned about the issue of the bank accounts of PTAs being taken over by the government. I wrote to the Minister of Education in 2019, November 2019, no response. I wrote to the Minister of Finance, no response. I wrote
That's
to
the way to
3 letters, and no response. You know, I got a call 3 weeks ago from a gentleman who's telling me, from the Ministry of Finance, that in order for the minister not to take over public funds, each account must have a TRN number different from the school. So it's not a new policy decision that's coming up. Right? So PTA funds, past student funds, any funds in a school that uses the school's TRN number is government funds.
Robbery.
No. Understand. You're not listening to me, boss. I'm just telling you what the man is telling me. It's government funds. And we have to be realistic. If we're going to fund the schools, we need to stop playing games. We need to stop playing games. And as far as board governance is concerned, Dr. Johnson touched it clear. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. 50% of the time is working properly, which is the church and trust fund schools. Use them as an example. All of us have someone that we looked up to growing up. So use the church and trust fund schools as an example for the schools that have these political people appointed on them, who have no interest in students. None. It's about the politics. I want to be a counselor, so I need to be on that board. I want to be this, so I need to be on that board. And that's the reality we're facing. And as a parent, it is difficult for us to see our children wasting away. Wasting away. It's not, we need to fix it. And I'm sorry, you're saying the real life training? No, the real dumb bill are ready because we have all the church and trust fund schools. And parents ready to work. What we need is a funding and a commitment from government to implement things.
Thank you, Mr.
make sure that each of accomplishes is that we tackle the low-hanging fruit. There's some low-hanging fruits that we must not be sidestepping, and we like the trillion of the hanging fruit, like early childhood education. Another thing that the Patterson report also highlighted was that the people in the ministry do not be listening. And I think that, yes, the active PS made a presentation of us, and she had made some presentation, but I have a sense that it is ad hoc. We must make them intentional that part of the engagement of each other with the ministry, because it does make sense that we try and establish an implementation committee to do what, because we are consultative. Then we have to go back again to the ministry. I think that the engagement must be with the ministry, low-hanging fruit. If we put another structure in place, it's just going to cause kick the ball further down the road. And the ministry came up with some beautiful understanding of the pattern report and the ministry recommendation. This should not be sidelined, and I will say that they are. I'm hoping that we take and bring the ministry personnel as partners respectively each of implementation. Because if we go on outline something separate and then to give to them, it's just going to be waste of time, waste of resources, and waste of everything. And I'd like to put it at that voice with respect to the partnership. Because I think that when the government removes fees, I mean, I've written an article and said what is going to happen is that we are leveling of the system, not a leveling down. Right, yes. Rather than recognizing that, yes, there are schools that are surviving with the fees, and that there are schools that are in need, what we call failing schools. It doesn't make sense to equalize everybody. As was presented, there's an equity there. If you call a school failing school, and they don't have the resource of the teachers and the finances to just address and attend the remedial action of those students, we need to recognize that those are low-hanging fruits that need to be addressed. You know, something that, and also, something that we need to look at the low-hanging fruits, not allow politics to interfere with the ethos mandate, with respect to, as you look at the Patterson report, with respect to what must be done. We must look at it objectively, bring on the stakeholders, and act decisively. And the ministry must be integral. I mean, there's too much skirting around our kind of tentative thing with respect to engaging the ministry. And I'd like us to forcefully make sure that the ministry is involved. Personally, the resources is there, so let us bring them on early in our implementation.
Can I just respond to that? So, I think I've said it before in different ways, and I just want to repeat. So the ministry is integrally involved with what we're doing. Nothing that is said, will be said, or intimated, or any excuse. The ministry is the primary implementing agency for the Patterson report. Right? And we have stated that. What we are doing is working with the ministry to create the capacity within the ministry to execute these recommendations. I don't want anyone to take away or to believe that the ministry is being silent. ETOP is not an operational model in the sense that we're not going into the ministry to do any work. You don't believe me? Ask me, yes. What we have done, we have gone specifically to the ministry. In fact, I meet weekly with the ministry, the minister and the PS. And our focus is on building capacity. So one of the things that we're doing right now is we're getting resources to augment the resources in the ministry so that the ministry can effectively implement the recommendations. So we're getting an executive, and we're calling our role the Chief Transformation
strategic unit. So we are creating the capacity or the implementing infrastructure. We are creating infrastructure to execute the report. No, they're answering to the ministry. But ultimately, ETOP, our mandate, is to report to the cabinet and the prime minister and the people of the country that the recommendations are being implemented. And that's why I meet, as I indicated, on a weekly basis to ensure that timelines are actually being executed on. That what we have committed to, we're delivering on. So I'm taking like 5 minutes to say something like I've said in 1 minute. But I've done that deliberately to ensure that that issue isn't repeated.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sounds to me as if the big concerns that has been expressed are really concerned about policy. And we are policy about funding, policy about governance, policy about what is the relationship between the owners of schools and the government who has to fund those schools. I know that the Patterson report has addressed these issues, but these are the issues clearly which are of great concern to this group. And on the issue of funding, we don't have a theoretical thing. We can go back to 2006, 2007, around that time when we were changing policy. The government said these were no longer mandatory and it was going to increase the subvention to schools. School return collectively, the compliance rate fell from about 90% down to 40-something%, and with the additional government resources, we ended up with less money to spend than before the changes in policy. Our current person, and we have to bear also in mind, what is this thing let's call the school? You have 1,700 students, you have 150 teachers, you have an administrative staff, you can zero staff, you have property, sometimes 2 campuses, there's no property manager, the people who work in the bursary probably would not get a job in accounts in a major firm. So, I'm no disrespect to them, but they're handling vast sums of money. We're not investing in a support structure. There is no property manager. Teachers want to go around and check to see if the toilet's flush, or if there's paper in the bathroom. Right? This is really an untenable situation. And earlier there was a comment about equity. But what does equity mean? For the ministry to say, or government to say, you can't charge 6 form more than when you're getting not a penny for 6 form. And then the government says, everybody in 5th form must not go to 6th form. And by the way, they have got a 6th form, which is not in your school, but who's responsible for them? And you really wonder, and then there was a noticeable policy, with no consultation, as far as I know. How are you going to, if you're at St. Jude and your student was in Michael, are you going to be responsible for their disciplinary issues? Right? So these are some of the issues that I think that are confronting us. And the funding issue is really at the heart of it all. Because without the resources, you can transform all you want in a way.
Policy issue or the funding issue is a policy, right? Not necessarily within the current law. You can make a recommendation. We speak to the minister and the prime minister and cabinet. But ultimately, it's a policy. Absolutely.
I just want to put on the table, yes, I take responsibility for what I'm going to say. when I went to the Ministry of Education and looked and saw how money was spending, pouring, zillion, I came to the conclusion that easily 25% of the large budget of the ministry was being spent very inefficiently. So while we look for plenty more money, yes, which is needed, please, as part of your oversight, look at what is being spent inside. Yes, look at what is being spent on personnel where there is no value being achieved for the expenditure on that personnel. I beg you.
Yes, we have a
Dr. Stokes. Yeah. Dr. Stokes, as I sat here and I listened to everybody speak, I came to realize more forcibly than before that there is a plethora of issues facing education in our country. And when we speak about education being in a state of crisis, that crisis constitutes a complexity of issues. If we cannot unravel the complexities and clearly define the problem, we will continue running around like headless chickens with no sense of direction or direction. The point is that all of us as stakeholders sitting here, we have a common goal. And that common goal is to ensure the establishment of a world-class education system for the 21st century. When I go back to the 2004 task force report, I see the description of an educated Jamaican. And when I look at the curriculum, and I look at the philosophy that underpin the curriculum, and the psychological and social issues that curriculum should address, I do not see a curriculum that addresses this. We speak about implementation, but implementation is just an element of the broad process of educational change. Educational change is very complex, and it begins with initiation. If at the initiation stage we are failing, that is, we are failing to get people to understand what the educational change involves, which is very complex. What are the roles of the stakeholders in all of this? And how are we going to proceed to do this? By involving everybody. We all are involved. We all need to come on board. And we need to break down the barriers of communication and get together and put our heads together to solve this problem. Work together for the common good. And that's our children. We all have a vested interest in education. This is our country. This is our society. These are our children. And we cannot differentiate them by baseline, elites, and poor children. If the Commission's report is showing that some schools are underperforming because they're not properly given attention to, then let us redistribute the much limited resources and direct them towards the school and offer them the kind of professional support and finance that they need to lift them up. We cannot be calling them failing schools and all of that. Continuous failure with no hopes of success is debilitating. And no wonder many of these schools just bow their tongues and sit down because psychologically they are irony. They're destroyed psychologically. So how are they going to move on? How are they getting any? The whole process of educational change is a very slow one, and it occurs incrementally. As Mrs. Basson said, that the 3 R's are important. But with the changing society, we can't focus on the 3 R's alone. But we have to use it as a foundation, make sure that that foundation is in place, and then use it as a stepping stone to get them to where they are. We need an equitable education system. We need differentiation in the classroom. I have myself been involved in writing differentiated curriculum for the Ministry of Education. And some of them are in the schools right now, and the teachers are at a loss as to how to implement it. There is no professional support for the teacher on the job. High-performing countries such as Japan and Korea and Finland have moved away from this cascade model of teacher education towards on-the-job professional development, where the teacher is helped on the job, where the teacher learns within the classroom, where the problems arise, and where decisions have to be made immediately to correct the problems in there. We don't have it. We don't have the support system for our teachers. And so I am in sympathy with our dear teachers.
I know we're going to rather have a response to each day.
Good evening, everyone. I think this is such an important conversation to have. Dr. Stokes, thank you so much. I know that it's very important for you as you implement this to manage expectations. And I think you tried to do that this evening. But I think it's very important for us also to have an idea of what success would be like. So I would want you to, if you could just, I know that it's still kind of, in the beginning stage, but I think as we move forward, we can't just say, oh, if you achieve 20%, it will be good. I mean, is it the intention of your group, your body, to let us know, listen, this is what this definitely is what we are going to achieve, because I think that sometimes we just kind of leave and say, well, you know what we get, and we're good to go. And if people don't know it, then it's going to be hard also to hold this body accountable for it. So is there an intention of your body, I guess the question is, to define what success is going to look like within a year or two? So that's a question for you, Dr. Stokes, and you've been taking a lot of questions. But I guess the other question is for my dear Mrs. Breyer. Mrs. Breyer, curriculum is not something that is static. It's always changing, and changing also to the needs of the students. The PEP results came out, only 14% of our students are highly proficient in English, and 49% of them are haven't reached what do they call it there?
The level.
Proficient, that's basically proficient in mathematics. And as Mrs. Baston had pointed out, it is such an overwhelming curriculum. It's so much, so many facts. It's so overwhelming. I guess my question is, if we want to change policy as a ministry representative, because obviously it's in the policy. We can talk from here until that kingdom come. If it is not in policy, it's not going to change. So I guess, what is the way forward in terms of policy? How do we as a body, what is our avenue to go to see that, listen, policy can be changed? I guess finally, so that's a question for you, Mr. Grant. I guess finally too, this is just something that is so important. I saw Anna earlier, Dr. Perkins, and I remember a couple of years ago she did the Grace Kennedy lecture, and the title, if I remember correctly, was moral disease, and so many things that were mentioned there are what we're seeing here. And I guess my thing is, what is from Mrs. White, but also for the ECC in terms of what is the plan to address this? And it can't just be led to something that is very kind of, okay, can I hit and miss? It needs to be something that is very, very structured, from the very beginning going on. What is the possibility for more education? Because as Mrs. Basson pointed out, we can learn so many things, and I think the smarter a child is, the more they feel empowered in doing wrong. Yeah? So how do we go about in terms of the moral education of our children? We're so desperately getting more than even English and math. Because if you're a nice person, we can work. We can make something work. So what is the state of moral education, going forward? Thank you.
Thank you. And instead of each person giving a specific response, I'm going to ask two more speakers before anyone responds. First, yes, go ahead.
Then Mrs. Thank you very much. Regional Good National Coordinator, respected Dr. Campaign, the success values and attitudes program that was in the Prime Minister. And I want to make a suggestion of the Stokes to you. You're coming away from this meeting undoubtedly with a couple of things foremost in your mind. And they give you a role on steering you, hold it strong. You hear clearly from this meeting that the schools can mobilize funds, but if it is perceived that it's government money, it's going to be a problem. I worked in government all my years. And one of the challenges we have is tell officers or agencies, increase your AIA, appropriations in aid. And this is going to consolidated fund. If you allow us to use a portion to fix that will be more motivated to do it. See if that policy can be changed. It's a nonsense policy. Makes no sense. Two, the one about the school fees. Money makes the wheel run. You can go back while the political leadership will have a problem. You can walk away from that committee, they're not going to feel good. You have the power, the strength, the influence to tell them, say, this might have been a policy some time ago, it might have been useful then, time has changed. I listened to consultation, I saw these motions, I strongly suggest that we change that. To get those two changed, that is the one. I want to make one now suggestion, my own. My background is business and industry. And 20 odd years ago, I came to the conclusion when we saw national industrial policy fail to grow the economy by 8% consecutively to make Jamaica this developed country, I came to the conclusion that it will never happen. At the moment, all black rates are migrating. You cannot compete in a globalized world with what? We need to transform the masses. I think GDP is going to be a challenge for growing. Allocation to the Ministry of Education is going to be a problem with increasing. See how we can utilize what we have. Make one suggestion to you. That is, every parent that has a child who's going to go to school, have a training program for that parent. Let parents do head equivalent so they can pass it too. So that when the children come home with the homework, we can help them. Let not children fail in debt no more, parents fail in debt. Early childhood, let them come and do structured program before they make a child registered, certified. If we can get that, we can change attitude to education and we can have some value.
Thank you very much. We're going to
Thank you, brothers and sisters. I've been asking the Lord to make me a wise older woman. And so some of the things that I'm about to say, I'm going to have to be very quick. May sound a little off-road, but I think they need to be said. And for full disclosure, I'm sitting next to my good friend, who was also a member of the task force of 2004. I'm seeing Anton over there, who was very involved in the implementation at the ministry at a certain point in the task force recommendations and so on. So here's what has come to me and has been playing in my mind, maybe for the last 3 or 4 years, maybe in graces because I've retired. Nothing short of a radical, maybe even revolutionary approach to education at this time is going to fix it. Yeah. And I say that in the context of what has happened in particular over the past 3, 4, maybe 5 years, where we have seen the thin wedge of inequality becoming a huge chasm. It opened up. It opened up in terms of the pandemic, yes. In terms of access to education, yes. In terms of a lack of adequate and meaningful response to, sometimes we were told, Maureen, sometimes we were told it was 20,000 children, sometimes it was 40,000 children. We don't know for sure how many children really suffered and continue to suffer as a result of what took place during the pandemic. So I've been sitting there and, Your Grace, I have tried to be very, very careful and helpful, not reserved, in terms of looking at the recommendations and hearing, I'm going to say three things. One, hearing the commission say, most of what we are saying now was really said under the Davis report, the Great Davis of blessed memory, reported in 2004. So I'm like, well, if it was said in 2004, and we're saying it in 2021, what has happened? And again, I take some responsibility as an educator and as an administrator. But I want to say that, and this may be slightly political, between 2004, December 2004, we had 2 years, 2005, 2006, I think if I go there, year 5 to 6, 6 to 7, when it was really just a matter of getting the organization in place. So there was a sort of oversight committee, and I sat on that oversight committee. And it took 2 years. And a lot of people quarreled with Mr. Patterson when he said, look, if we're going to do this, we need to go to the NHG, we need to get some money to do this. So 2005, 2007, a new government comes into place, and there is a change in terms of the organization structure. A lot of things went from that administrative body that will see to the implementation of the Davis report recommendations, and it slowed things down immensely. Then we go to 2012, and Ronnie takes over, and there were some things that happened well. And I'm going to say that it happened well, given the fact that you are putting oil in a ship while it's moving, and it's pretty difficult, or trying to mend a train while it's moving. So there were difficulties. You already had in place, let me just say you had in place the transformation team. The last director was Jean Hastings. They changed it. So then a lot of it is not new. From what David said and what is being said now, the e-talk sounds different, but from what you're saying, it's about trying to implement things. So the third thing is, and I'm going to go back to this issue of equality versus equity. The report speaks about equality and equity, and there's massive confusion. Because, let me take, for example, the recommendations about upgrading tertiary level institutions. What does it say? We will give $2 billion and say to the institutions, you need to bid for this, you need a competition. That is not equality, neither is it equity. And so, while there are pronouncements about equality, the framework, the philosophical underpinning is not about equity. It is about competition. And at this time, we really can do without competition. We need to have processes that really speak to equity and making our system equitable. And at this time, Maureen is serving, and is serving many on the way that industry, because it does not look good about here, and I suffer with you and with everybody else. And so, Dr. Stokes, you have a hard job of work to do. But what you're going to do is not going to be done and impact the least among our children in the way in which they need to be impacted, liberated, transformed. Short of a miraculous, revolutionary approach to education in this country, taking on some of the things that Ray said, taking on some of the things that other speakers have said, but really and truly, it's what is the framework? What is the context? what do we really want for our children? The 20,000, 200,000 children, or 20,000 or 40,000 and more who have gone missing, they are going to cause us grief. And if one of us suffers, all suffer.
All right. So, the last point is probably a good start. Revolution is needed in education. We could say a transformation is needed in education, which is what this committee is about, overseeing the implementation of recommendations. You also made an important point by going back to the 2004 Davis task force, and also to highlight the fact that a lot of the recommendations that we're seeing are not novel. We've seen them before. And I can therefore end where I started this evening. Implementation is the key to all of what we're talking about. Not necessarily trying to get all the best ideas to get perfection. Imagine where we would be today if the Davis report was materially implemented. Just imagine for a bit where we would be today. Hence, our focus is not so much on rewriting the Patterson report, on trying to get the best report or the best recommendation, but to have what I would call a pragmatic approach and to recognize that the Patterson report, flawed it may be in some of its recommendations, in some of its omissions, but there are good recommendations there. So if we implement just some of them, forget about 100% of them. Let's look at some material ones that actually move the needle on these areas. And I'm absolutely positive that we would have moved this country along in a big way. In terms of the definition of success, the question that was asked earlier, so I would say it's really in two parts. So the definition of success for ETOP, that's very easy. It's about the implementation of recommendation. So that's very transparent in terms of how much we will actually implement. But the bigger measure of success ultimately is looking back at our education system, I would say 5-10 years from now, and to compare it to where we are today, and to see if educational outcomes would have improved. Very, very simple. And that's where I leave today. Ultimately, what we're about, what we should be about today, all of us, is that in 5 years' time, when we look at the tangible outcomes from education, when we look at how kids are performing at early childhood, at the primary, secondary, we compare it to 2022. If we have done a great job, then it should be evident for all to see. And so I'm asking, again where I started, there's no point putting ourselves in boxes and silos, because we're going to be here again as night shall fall away, having the same conversation like we're having.
Dr. Stokes, could we have a tracker so that you can see some of the benchmarks?
Absolutely. So one of the things that
public media.
Absolutely. So the implementation plan that we're working on will be made available to the public. It's going to be in a project management format, will have reporting, you will see the initiatives that are being executed, and so you can follow. Just
Sorry, we really need to wrap up.
but yeah, just let me tell you, that Donovan is not fine.
Just some basic facts. And this race, back in 2016, your auxiliary fees was $65,000 a year. It's something. I was 40, you were 45, somewhere around there. Right. So, and at that time, the average cost of educating a child across the board, average cost, was $30,000 a year. The average cost of education, and the government is not, was in 2016 was $17,000, was $2,000 for kid, right? Papa. The average cost of educating a child 6 years later is nearly $90,000. And it's still the same 17,000 and 2,000. You tell me how any of these entities can survive. Which is why the Patterson report said, go into NHT and assist them.
We thank Dr. Stokes very much. He has to go.